Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Ari Thurger and today I'm going to talk about Stainnak and also the importance of reindeer among the Sami. This is in fact a response to one of my patrons' questions concerning precisely the Stainnak, who it is or what it is. However, there isn't much that is actually known about the Stainnak, not because I was lazy and didn't bother to research or because of the lack of sources, which unfortunately indeed there are only a few sources speaking of the Stainnak, and I'll leave them by the end of this video so you can check by yourself. But the truth is, even among the Sami themselves, much has been forgotten or completely lost. And the Sami and the speakers of Sami languages are a minority, which is a direct result of historical oppression of the Sami and the several methods to discourage the use of their language, religion, and their entire culture and way of life. So indeed, sadly, there's lack of information concerning the Sami cultural world in general, even among the Sami themselves. So in order to speak about the Stainnak, which has often been labeled the lesbian reindeer, but we shall see that further ahead, don't worry. I will also have to speak about the importance of reindeer among the Sami, so we might better understand or grasp the importance of the Stainnak itself, which is a special kind of reindeer and also related to the other world, the lower world. So please bear that in mind that indeed only in the past 10 or 15, maybe 20 years, there's been a growing interest concerning the Sami to recover their culture and languages. So not much is yet known if we compare it, of course, with the amount of information that has indeed been lost to us and the great amount of scattered pieces of the puzzle and missing pieces as well. I'm also doing this video because I have the perhaps privilege, but most importantly, at least to me, I have the luck and honor to be friends with a Sami family, one of its members being a Noaidi, a Sami spiritual leader, as you know it. So I offer my help and exchange knowledge with them, and in turn, I also earn valuable pieces of knowledge and also advice, even in spiritual terms, of course. So in this friendship, we are helping each other to recover the knowledge of the past. And as such, I know that this video might also be useful, I hope, to other Sami people, which I know they are also in this channel and always eager to learn. So it's a win-win, right? We can all teach and learn with each other. So I dedicate this video to my Sami close friends and all the other Sami as well, of course, obviously. Also, just before we start this, a few things to have in mind. The Sami have often been called Laps from Lapland, and that indeed must stop, as it is a very derogatory term. And I'm sure by the end of this video you will see in the bibliography I've used to compose this video that some academics, some scholars still to this day continue to use the term Lap. And even myself, a couple of years back, I genuinely thought that the Sami were not Sami, but indeed Laps from Lapland, because that's what has been taught for almost the past 200 years, and we don't know any better until the Sami finally were allowed to have a voice and spoke. The term Lap is something between the lines of simpleton, because since Protestantism in the north, the Sami have been considered irrational, foolish, and stupid due to the differences between Lutheran beliefs of the Scandinavians from the 17th century onwards, and of course with the belief systems of the Sami. But also because Scandinavian scientists, mostly in the 19th century, were studying and measuring the physiognomy and the size of the head of Sami people, and came to the conclusion they were, and I quote, from an inferior race, so therefore considered simpletons, lapps. Sadly, these scientific studies were quite common and taken as normal throughout the 19th century and early 20th century, which, as you can see, were absolutely ridiculous and obviously racist. So they are not lapps, they are the Sami from Sápmi, right? And indeed, you should not call them lapps at all. The same way you should not call Eskimo the Inuit indigenous peoples, as Eskimo is a very offensive and deteriorating term. Finally, I'll be pronouncing Stainnak, the very special type of reindeer we are going to address in this video. I'll pronounce it as I know how, because I'm only more familiar, let's say, to only one specific Sami language, which is, of course, North Sami. Take special notice that the Sami isn't one language, but it is a language family consisting of no less than 10 distinct but related languages. So not every Sami pronounces or even writes in the same way. And it makes it harder, as the Sami languages are spoken in 4 different countries: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And most Sami end up speaking the languages of the countries they are inserted in. Centuries of oppression have taken their toll. Many Sami to this day still recall the punishments and how they were shamed in schools and churches for speaking their own languages and being who they are. And this has been going on at least since the Viking Age, actually, as we find a lot of racist and highly derogatory accounts towards the Sami from the part of the Old Norse people. And this is quite noticeable, actually, in the Old Norse written sources. So when in other previous videos I have said that the Scandinavians had been very racist and xenophobic towards the Sami, until quite late, actually, and even to this day, sadly, this is still noticeable in many parts of Scandinavia, and of course Finland and northwestern Russia. Now you understand, or you know what I meant. I remember that some people in the comments doubted that the Scandinavians could have possibly been racist towards the Sami, because the Sami are white, and I just shake my head towards that, as clearly that shows a great amount of insensibility, but also how the privilege of some based solely on the color of their skin completely clouds their judgment and sense of reality. But let the Sami speak for themselves. They have much and more to tell. So now, with no more delay, please, let's get started. All right, so the importance of reindeer among the Sami. We understand the importance of certain animals in a culture, not only when they are part of the economy of that culture, but also when specific gods and guardians are attributed to specific animals. Because not every sacred animal is one that is often consumed, so we do have to take that in mind. Among the Sami, the activities of reindeer herding, hunting, and fishing have specific gods and also guardians. And in this way, we understand the importance of such activities. Not deities related to the animals within those activities, but related to the activity itself, right? However, there are sacred animals who end up being deities and or guardians in their own right. So they gain singularity and are detached from a general activity. That is the case of the bear, of whom I have already spoken about in a previous video, and of course the case of the Stáinnak, the special reindeer standing out from the rest of the herd, with its own specific power and activity and holiness, not just as an animal in the herd, but also as an entity with the same name or designation, who is part of the entities of great relevance that inhabit the other world, the lower world. But we shall speak of that, of her, of the Stainnak, further ahead. But this to remind you that the bear was one of the most important symbols of Sami society, perhaps second only to the reindeer. But they seem to either have been in equal terms, or it's in fact reindeer that has more relevance. Among many cultures of the circumpolar regions, the Arctic regions, it is reindeer that makes its stand as the primary means of consumption, and therefore the most important in the economy of many circumpolar Arctic indigenous peoples. Bear hunt, on the other hand, was, and in some parts to this day still is, mostly done because the bear itself is considered to be a very powerful non-human person, and bear hunting is rarely done because bear meat isn't part of the economy, not a main source of food, but rather hunting a bear is for the acquisition of the power the animal possesses, and therefore it is sacred in those terms. So after reindeer, the bear was the most common animal depicted in Sami drums, but also previous to drums, also depicted in rock art. But reindeer is indeed the animal we see quite often in many cultural aspects of the Sami. If we inspect the archaeological sites of Sami context and the rituals and offerings that contain animal parts, or indeed the animals or parts of the animals as either offerings and or sacrifices, or to the animal itself, there is a display of respect. Respect was given, making the sole focus of the religious intention the animal present in there. We see that reindeer was by far the most important animal among the Sami, as both wild and domesticated reindeer constitutes 66% of animal bones from such religious contexts, and offering sites that show a magical religious intention, while 8% derive from livestock, especially sheep and goat. And bear, dogs, and cats are by far the smallest amount, or the smallest percentage of animal offerings or religious contexts in honor of or dedicated to such animals, even though the bear was the second most important animal to the Sami. But as I've said, since bear hunt was not a question of survival or a strong part of the Sami economy, not a primary means of consumption, bears were rarely killed, specifically for the power they contained only, and indeed the majority of bear burials does not show evidences of sacrifice, but rather a display of respect in honor of the animal to avoid its wrath and vengeance upon the human community. Although I must say that it is during the Middle Ages, the Nordic Middle Ages, that we start to see an increasing of bear hunt among the Sami, especially in borderlands with the Old Norse people, in border regions. Precisely because bear pelts were costly products of the Scandinavian Old Norse elite, and many Sami started to hunt bears to sell the pelts to the Norse. Right, reindeer were a source of food, clothing, tools, and transportation among the Sami of various communities, and it's precisely due to its great importance that some mythological accounts have survived. I mean, so much has been lost that only what was highly important remained, precisely because there must have been indeed a tremendous amount of folk tales, folklore, and mythological accounts, practical rituals, several cultural aspects related to the reindeer among the Sami. Otherwise, nothing would have survived if it hadn't been tremendously important. So, the mythical accounts left to us of Sami pre-Christian religion reveal a deeply rooted sacrality associated with reindeer. I'll put a note in here concerning important surviving mythological accounts among the Sami, which shows us that in Sami culture, reindeer were central as both sources of of food or sustenance, and also mythic figures associated with the sky and indeed coming from the sky and given to the Sami as gifts, as divine blessings. So the Sami might use reindeer in various ways in their daily lives. So it's no coincidence that in archaeology of Sami context, of course, the great majority of sacred sites, burials, and displays of magical religious activity concerning animals, reindeer was by far the most active element and religious motif. Of course, the great majority of these contexts represent sacrifice. Sami reindeer appears most often in religious performances as sources of sacrificial meat. This is important to take into consideration because, as I've said before, the case of the bear presents a different religious understanding. Bear hunt was rare, as I have said, and it involved the intervention of a Noaidi, the Sami spiritual leader, choosing the hunter of the community, hunter, a specific hunter, to find the bear and kill the bear. The bear was woken up to make sure that all of his wandering spirits were present at the moment of death, so that the bear might be wide awake and with its full strength and power. The bear was killed, eventually, brought into the village as an honored guest. There was the consumption of its meat to acquire its power in a ceremony and to acquire its strength. And after that, its bones were carefully deposited within the earth, which is why we call it bear burial, because it is indeed a careful burial of an animal with specific ceremonies and the ritual and religious intention, not only to honor the animal, but to avoid also its wrath and vengeance upon the human community. Its bones carefully deposited so the bear may be reborn in spring. So bear burial in Sami contexts rarely shows sacrificial intention. Reindeer, on the other hand, in the great majority of cases, was sacrificed. Reindeer was often the main source of food. The activity of reindeer herding was a sacred activity with its own deities and guardians associated to it. So occasionally a reindeer was sacrificed, and this is what I find most intriguing. Now, this might be a coincidence or not, but the sacrifice and deposition of reindeer on the earth, when it's burial context, of course, which are or were the great majority of the contexts, it wasn't only the deposition of bones and antlers, and solely by these elements we would assume that, well, the meat wasn't entirely consumed, so only the bones and antlers were given as a sacrifice. But it's not the case, actually. The great majority of depositions of bone and antler from reindeer, we also understand that together with these elements, it was also deposited blood, flesh, and certain organs. So we see a clear distinction here between reindeer that was killed for consumption alone and reindeer that was killed as a source of sacrifice only. To the earth, it was given almost the entire reindeer as a source of sacrifice. Of course, perhaps parts of it had been consumed, obviously, in the special ceremony, but much of it was given to the earth. And now, coincidence or not, these specific contexts have a unique phenomenon associated to them, which is lush vegetation and characteristic plant types. The places where the sacrificial reindeer were deposited gave rise to lush vegetation and specific types of plants. In other words, it gave special fertility to that specific place. New vegetation for reindeer herds to feast upon, and perhaps even humans as well. It's not just the reindeer that would be deposited, but a single blood sacrifice could contain an astonishing number of artifacts, making it a sacred site. And the sacred site as a whole could contain hundreds of different objects from a wide geographic region. So I find this pretty interesting, not only turning the site into a sacred site for other peoples among the Sami to come in, to go in there, but also the amount of new and better flora that is able to sprout due to the blood sacrifice of reindeer. And the earth, in many mythologies, is associated with fertility, and the other world, the lower world, and also the underworld, the concept of the underworld, as the place where those who have died start to inhabit, and they themselves propitiate fertility to the upper world. And as we shall see further ahead, the Stainnak, the very special reindeer, is an inhabitant of the other world, the lower world, and in some Sami cultural geographical areas, indeed a deity of the other world, of the underworld, propitiating fertility. So, mythology depicting a very real phenomenon which can be observed. But just because reindeer were sacrificed for whichever purposes, and the entire procedure was different, of course, than the one given to the bear, this doesn't mean that the sacrifice was carelessly done and without any respect or honor to the animal. Let's not forget that reindeer was the most important animal to the Sami, not only associated with deities and guardians and some being deities themselves, but also associated with holiness, sacredness, fertility, and a whole range of magical, religious, and cultic and mythological conceptions and belief systems. Of course, in archaeology, we do not know how the entire process was done, the entire ceremony. What we do know is the great amount of sacred objects and a vast quantity of material culture in direct association with reindeer burials and sacred sites, which shows us the great importance of the animal. However, we have literal sources, literal evidences of ritual and ceremony from a later period, of course, but it gives us some idea of the great importance reindeer had and how the ceremonies were done, or certain elements in the ceremonies. Because even the sacrificed reindeer was treated with great respect and reverence. Lutheran missionaries in the 17th century describe some Sami practices for selecting an animal to be sacrificed. An animal deemed to be suitable to enter in negotiations with a particular deity. And as such, the animal is what allows the connection between the human person and the deity. Different deities favored different animals of different color and sex. Remember that. But continuing, animals dedicated to certain deities were first marked with ribbons on their ears. And the marked animal continued to live on its life normally within the herd until the time came to be sacrificed. Upon sacrifice, the animal's bones were carefully treated, collected, and preserved to facilitate the animal's reincarnation. Sami culture and religion is highly animistic to this day, so not everything that dies is permanently dead. In fact, death, at least in the specific case of the Sami, constitutes literally a passage to live an equal life, but in the underworld, as the opposite of the upper world. And reincarnation here, especially for animals, constitutes yet another passage from a world to another world, up and down, upper and lower. The Sami cosmos had two, maybe three possibly, but we know for sure that it constitutes two parallel levels, the upper world, which is not only the earth we live upon, but also including the sky, and the underworld, as the realm parallel to the upper one, similar in many aspects of life. Parallel worlds and their boundaries can also be defined by the land itself and the sea, or by mountaintop or the sky. These worlds were united through a world axis, a similar conception we find in Norse myths, in the world tree or the tree of life, Yggdrasil. representing this axis, right? So it is also important to understand the construction of the Sami cosmos, not only to understand animal burials, but also to understand what we shall talk about next, the Stáinnak, the when it is associated with the other world or the underworld, as being a parallel to this world, and physical boundaries are important, especially mountains and lakes, as we shall see further ahead. The crossing of such boundaries to reach the lower parallel world in which Stainnak inhabits, and to which each animal that is buried go to live and wait for their rebirth, for their reincarnation into the upper world once again. So now let's take a look at the Stainnak. So the first thing we must take into mind concerning the Stainnak, and I do hope I got this right as I read the sources over and over again, but let's start first by taking a look at the Sami drum. And I urge you to closely watch how it looks like, the shape and all of that, because nowadays there are many companies selling Sami drums, which is basically picking at random Sami drum motifs and placing them on circular drums, on Lakota drums from the people Oceti Shakovin, the people of the Seven Council Fires, groups of Native American tribes and First Nations peoples. That is a great disrespect, as you might imagine, towards both the Oceti Shakovin and the Sami themselves. And it's cultural appropriation and not cultural appreciation in this specific case. So do be careful with that and such companies and what you are buying. Anyway, the Noaidi drum, Noaidi being the correct term for the Sami spiritual leader, right? What we usually call or place in the general category of shaman. So such a drum from the Noaidi drum, reflects several symbolisms and religious motifs and systems of embodied knowledge, and they also reflect the cosmological system of the Sami and their worldviews and animistic beliefs. In Sami drums, you will almost always find at least one reindeer depicted in there, or several reindeer. It's not only because reindeer was the most important animal to the Sami, as I've said. On some drums, mythical epics were also painted where the Noaidi, the spiritual leader, with the assistance of helping spirits, would hunt a celestial reindeer or bear. Now, the skin used for the drum came from a special animal, a Stainnak, a sterile reindeer cow, or also a reindeer without a calf. So that's what the Stainnak is. The sterile female reindeer is sometimes depicted as having one horn, a reindeer with tremendous strength and whose behavior is different than all the other female reindeer. The Stainnak becomes sacred. There's an element of holiness to it. I would even risk it divinity, and we shall see why in a moment. But it's important to remember that this might not be a general conception throughout all Sápmi, among all the Sami, because it seems to have been something related to the Sami of Norway, but also from Finland. So not all Sami might see holiness or even divinity in the Stainnak. There are at least two surviving myths related to the Stainnak, as either giving birth to all the other reindeer during spring, or being a protective reindeer of the underworld, the underground, without which no other reindeer would be able to exist because she protects them all. A reindeer giving birth to all reindeer is also related to the reindeer coming from the sky in other myths, a mother reindeer. As I've previously placed on a note, among the Sami, there is the daughter of the sun, and, well, as a deity responsible for providing the Sami community with its first reindeer, giving birth to the reindeer. Also, there's that other myth I've also placed, I hope, on the note about two female entities, one who treats her reindeer herd, treats it well, and the other does not. One becoming the ancestor of all the tame reindeer, while the other being the ancestor of the wild reindeer. In either of these cases, it reflects the centrality of the reindeer in Sami culture, both as sources of sustenance and also mythological figures. And they come from the sky, and they are given to the Sami. So these myths show similarities to some accounts given to the Stainnak, which gives us the impression that perhaps there is indeed a syncretism of ideas in here and associating different reindeer deities to one another. Again, these might not be mythological accounts from all the Sami, but different accounts from different Sami communities, eventually merging together and creating this general idea of the Stainnak. And there's another account which I think it might be important to address, because the Stainnak has a different behavior than all the other female reindeer. And the Stainnak is often depicted as a lesbian reindeer. This is something interesting. The Stainnak is a sterile female reindeer, and she is often depicted, and I quote from various sources, as acting like a male reindeer, whose behavior was different and therefore regarded as holy, protecting female reindeer and the entire herd from predators. Hence, possibly why it is also said that all the other reindeer would not exist without the Stainnak, because she is a protective female holy reindeer, protecting the entire herd from predators, thus preserving the lives of the herd. This protective aspect of the Stainnak has a parallel with another myth, which is the goddess Saraka, as the goddess that favors reindeer and to whom only female reindeer were sacrificed to, as she only accepts female reindeer under her protection. But returning to the case of the Stainnak playing the male role, as she charges against predators and is very protective of the herd, especially of other female reindeer. We have to be careful with this idea of playing the male role, because this doesn't seem to be a perspective from the Sami, but from people outside the cultural world of the Sami, with very obsolete ideas of gender roles imposed in the human societies of those people. Especially if we take in mind that the first detailed written accounts concerning the Sami culture come from Scandinavian Lutheran missionaries, and until at least the 80s of the 20th century, the Sami had no voice at all and were oppressed by the other countries they were inserted in. So this idea of the Stainnak playing the male role, what is truly implied here, I think, isn't just the behavior that is usually associated with male reindeer as being protective of the herd and charging against predators, but it's also because what makes the Stainnak so, let's say, special and different and unique than all the other reindeers is that it is a lesbian reindeer. I'm not sure if all the Sami agree with this idea, so take it with a grain of salt on this one. Because I had the chance to speak with many Sami people and a couple of Sami families as well. Well, no more than 40 people in total, but all of them agree and have this concept that the Stainnak is indeed lesbian. Her behavior isn't only of protectiveness towards the herd, and especially towards the other female reindeer, but also her sexual preferences are also towards the same gender. Of course, around 40 Sami individuals saying and confirming that the Stainnak is lesbian, of course, doesn't prove that among all the Sami this is a general belief. But we should take in mind the behavior of animals within herds. It's true, of course, homosexuality is a natural behavior among all animals. And among reindeer, we see indeed homosexuality as well. And this is observable. And reindeer herders are obviously aware of this, as this is their entire life, their entire daily routine. What makes the Stainnak so special and unique and different from all the other female reindeer are all these aspects I have mentioned. She's sterile, she's highly protective of the herd, and especially of females. She charges against the predators, and she is lesbian. The Stainnak is a sterile lesbian reindeer, and it's her skin that is used to make the sacred Sami drum, the drum of the Noaidi. Not from just any reindeer, but from a Stainnak. And the accounts of the Stainnak being a divine or holy reindeer coming from the sky, creating the first reindeer, etc., seems to be an amalgamation of different deities related to reindeer and their myths reflected on the Stainnak, on the figure of the Stainnak, the female reindeer that stands out. It is special, different, unique, therefore a sacred element within the Sami cultural world. In conclusion, Stainnak is a protective female holy reindeer, sterile and lesbian, and protecting the herd from predators, which isn't a usual behavior as reindeer go, because they always run away from predators. Stainnak is very fond of female reindeers, so the idea of the male role in this female holy reindeer is due to her behavior of trying to mate with female reindeer of the herd. So in other words, it's a lesbian reindeer and considered sacred due to her protectiveness towards the other female reindeer and consequently towards the entire herd. So the skin used for the making of the sacred drums of the Sami was usually from the skin of a Stainnak. Just to finalize this video, I would like to speak a little bit about the conception of the world of the dead, to link this to another video I have made. As I've also pointed out, the Stainnak is also said to protect reindeer in the Underworld or the lower world, which gives us a parallel with the goddess Saraha, accepting the sacrificed female reindeer in the other world. So I'll take the opportunity to speak a little bit about something else. This Underworld conception isn't the same realm of the spirits in Sami mythology, such as Saivo, which is one of the Sami realms of the dead, or for the dead, where the deceased, the Saivoma, continue to exist and have happy lives in this realm or this world with their families and the ancestors. But we shall return to this concept of the Saivo further ahead. Among the Sami of Norway, the Saivo world or realm is believed to exist in the mountains, within the mountains, whereas in Finland it is usually believed to be under special double-bottomed lakes connected by a small hole. So, speaking of lakes for now, there's also the Underworld realm of Rotaimo, which is the world of the spirits in the bottom of a bottomless lake, where Rotha, or Ruto, governs. And for more information on this, check the video about the horse in the Norse religion. So, indeed, this underground realm where the Stainnak exists is more of a fairy-like realm. If I'm not mistaken, this realm is called Udamolmi, which is the opposite realm to that of humans in the upper world. So this underworld, lower world, where fairy-like creatures reside. So the exact parallel realm to the upper world, as we have seen previously in Sami cosmology, being divided by two realms at least. And notice the Hulda in the name, related to the hidden folk, usually underground creatures of the lower world beneath the earth in Old Norse, Icelandic, and Old German folklore. This is often associated with concealed entities and realms beneath the earth. So the Stainnak would also reside in this particular realm of the hidden people. Not specifically a world for the dead, for the deceased, where the human dead go, but a realm where other entities live. They do not have to be necessarily dead. So I think it's important to make this clear distinction, because the Stainnak, we have spoken previously throughout this video, isn't an entity that resides in the same space to where the human dead go. But instead, it is an entity also inhabiting the realm where other entities, non-human and non-dead, naturally inhabit, naturally exist. This is the realm of Hulda Malvi. In Sami mythology, this is the realm of the underground people, the hidden people, as far as I know, of course. This is where the hidden people live, from which you should never accept any food from, or you become an Hulda as well, and never come back again to the human world, to the surface, to the upper world. But why should you? According to the Sami folklore, this realm is better and richer than the world above. But, there's always a but, the problem here is that if you become an Hulda, a hidden person, you are no longer human, and you can neither return to the human world, the upper world, nor can you be with your ancestors, because you became a completely different entity. Anyway, for more information on the Hulda folk, the hidden people, as well as Hulda, check my video about Old Mother Frau Hol, where I have explored this in Old German and Norse contexts. Now, returning to the idea of the Saivo as the underworld, or one of the realms for the deceased, as centuries went by, much has been lost concerning the Sami cultural world and their belief systems, and their voice wasn't heard until quite recently. So, many ideas from Sami belief systems, folklore and mythology, have been from the perspective of non-Sami people, disregarding a lot of important ideas and instead building parallels that fit into their own religious ideas. So Saivo became this general conception, general idea of the underworld of the Sami for the deceased. But this is because much of the earlier studies concerning the Sami and their belief systems were simply seeking parallels with religions people were more familiar with, such as Christianity, with the dualism of heaven and hell. So Saivo became this sort of general underworld, and that's it. And many other realms were either completely put aside or included eventually in this idea of underworld. Saivo is exclusively one of the realms to where the human deceased go to. However, to the south of Scandinavia, the Sami used to believe that the ancestors lived in holy mountains called Saive or Aimi. In the north Sami area, the word in the form of Saiva, directly related to Saivo, refers to sacrificial sites and the holy lakes, with no rivers flowing into them. Probably this is the original meaning of Saivo, as a realm beneath the lakes, beneath a body of water, and water being a means to reach or an entrance into the lower world and to inside the mountain, the sacred mountain, flowing to the inside of this mountain, the holy mountain, where the ancestors reside. So I take the opportunity to link this to the previous video I have done about water and as a means to reach the other world, but also as a real boundary, real physical boundary, separating the world of the living from the world of the dead in Scandinavian mythology and Old Norse conceptions of the afterlife. So you might also see the Sami influences upon Old Norse myths, folklore, and belief systems concerning the afterlife and the element of water. So Saivo would also be a lake. So let's not forget that the Sami shaman, the Noaidi, often used a fish, the animal fish, as the vehicle of his soul when he went to the land of the dead. And this process of out-of-body experience among the Sami is referred to as literally diving. Saiva or Saivo suggests that both the Sami and the Scandinavians of the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, not Old Norse people, because they did not speak Old Norse yet when these beliefs were common among these people. These Scandinavians believed that the ancestors lived in a mountain, within a mountain, underwater, or that this mountain could be reached through water. This is a belief that survived until the late Viking Age and the Middle Ages, the Nordic Middle Ages, as it can still be read in late Nordic, medieval, and Icelandic sagas, this idea of the ancestors or the dead in general also moving towards a holy mountain, reached by crossing the water, or a lake, or diving into a lake, or being drowned and reach the mountain through water beneath the earth. So it's important to make this distinction because in Sami folklore, the Stainnak is generally understood to also live in the underworld, but this becomes very vague. As you can see, the underworld or a lower world of the Stainnak isn't the same as the underworld to where the dead go, the human dead, which makes the Stainnak even more special and sacred because it's also a type of entity, semi-divine in nature, existing in a different realm, making it part of the group of non-human and non-dead entities which have a direct contact with the upper world, therefore capable of interaction, but also to give something to the communities of the living. And this idea is interesting because there are a couple of written records that when the Sami did sacrifice of an animal, especially reindeer, to communicate with a given deity, especially or specifically related to that animal, the deity being related to that animal or favored by that entity, sometimes that same entity would appear and join the sacrifice and take it. So it's important to remember that to the Stainnak, several mythological accounts of other deities, several deities of the Sami, related to reindeer, seemed to have been incorporated into the Stainnak herself. So it's quite possible that when the Stainnak was sacrificed, the deity who favored specifically the Stainnak would join the sacrifice and take the Stainnak, making the Stainnak herself a semi-divine being or even a goddess in its own right. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't go away just yet. There will be, for those who want to check it, of course, and continue the studies on the Stainnak and the Sami cultural world, etc. You will have the bibliography I've used to compose this video. You will have it by the end of this video. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope it was useful. See you on the next video. And as always, tak for det. Thanks for today.